So 50 years ago, when I was interviewed by NBC News,
Can you get closer to the mic, please?
50 years ago, can you hear me now?
I think this is the one. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So 50 years ago, I was interviewed by NBC News, and as you heard, I called myself a revolutionary. And I'm happy to say that I am still a revolutionary. And that's because I'm still passionate about fighting for peace, for working for peace. And I'm still an activist and an organizer. And I'm still, as I think Clara pointed out, you could call me a goody two-shoes. You could call me, I'm still a Midwesterner, and I think I am the example of what the National Vietnam Moratorium Committee appealed to. And I'm proud to say that my alma mater, Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, stepped up to sponsor a significant commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam Moratorium Committee this past October. Along with my co-chairman, Dr. Michael Doyle, a Ball State history professor, an oral historian, he and I spent 16 months organizing that event. So it wasn't an easy thing to do. And we had no idea anybody else was doing it, and I guess it's because nobody else was doing it. And I was really shocked by that because over 2 million people came out for the original Vietnam moratorium, and thousands in Boston and New York and California, and I thought they'd be having all these huge events, but the only people who did it were us. So the theme of our event was reunite, remember, and rekindle. On the eve of the conference, we held a reunion dinner for alums who had participated in the original Vietnam Moratorium Committee. And it was certainly good to meet up with people that I hadn't seen in 50 years. And that included alumni, faculty, and people from the Muncie community. And you could see from the NBC News, we involved people in the community during all of the events 50 years ago. So we began the conference by remembering what we had done in 1969. My opening address recounted the events of the moratorium that we did every month from October through April of 1970. And I don't know if this is clear to everyone, but the idea of the moratorium was that we would take 1 day off in October, 2 days off in November, 3 days off in December, and etc. Eventually that got to be too much. They thought they'd end the war before we got to a week, but that didn't happen. So it went back to 1 day. But we did that every month. And the beauty of the Vietnam Moratorium Committee was that they gave us kind of general guidance, but it was up to our own committees to figure out what to do. So we were able to organize events that appealed to a place like conservative Muncie, Indiana. Didn't appeal to everyone. And someone like myself, who had no experience organizing anything, was able to organize what we did. And Sam Brown himself came to our event in April, the taxpayers rally, and he was our major speaker. He had seen that we were on the national news, and we were also in the Washington Post front page, so he thought he should get out to the Midwest where things were really happening. So after remembering, we rekindled the spirit of the 60s with an inspiring keynote speaker, David Harris, and I'm sure everyone in this room knows who I'm talking about, the leader of the draft resistance movement, and a shining example of someone whose moral compass guided him throughout his life. And during his speech, he reminded us that it is our duty as American citizens to own the war in Vietnam, because if we don't, we will keep experiencing the horror and suffering of it, and so will our grandchildren. It will own us. He also reminded us that we are what we do. We are not what we say, we are not what we think, we are not what we write, we are what we do. So during our program, we also held 3 panel discussions. This was a day-long conference. And the first panel was about what we did right, what we did wrong, what were the lessons we learned so that we could pass those on to the next generation of protesters. We also had a panel on whatever happened to the peace movement, what are people doing now? And our final panel included veterans of the Vietnam War and veterans from other wars, Iraq and Afghanistan, and they talked about their experience of coming home from war. And speaking of veterans, I want to acknowledge my husband, Lou Posner, who cannot be with us today. While I was protesting at Ball State, he was serving in Vietnam in the Navy as a journalist. And he did his part to wage peace. He wrote a lengthy article about why America should not be in Vietnam. And he sent it to a professor at Ball State. And I happened to be that professor's secretary. So I typed that article, that was my first contact with my future husband, and it was published in our underground newspaper. So as a result of that, he risked court-martial, but that didn't happen, but while his shipmates in Da Nang were being sent home early, he was transferred to Saigon and had to serve another 3 months in the war zone. So that's what happened to some people who waged peace. So I knew that our goal last month of rekindling the spirit of peace and an interest in activism and social justice had been met when several students came up to me after my speech and wanted to know, how did I keep going back there in 1969 when so many people were against us? I told them that I had an unshakable belief in a power greater than myself.
Amen.
And that holds true today. When one young woman just said, I just want to hug you, I knew that at least one person's heart had been affected. So we actually got a lot of young people to come to our conference, and I think that's really important because we see that in many of these events, the hair color indicates that we were there at the time. But a lot of people came, young students came. There was a group of young people who got organized and created a website about our event, and our whole event is now on that website, so I could give the link later on, but anybody who wants to see what we did at Ball State, it's on our website. So we ended our conference with a memorial for all those who died in the war, in front of a curtain of 1,000 origami peace cranes, which were made by a veteran of the Afghanistan war. We talked about several things. A Vietnam veteran, Jerry Waite, who went from waging war to waging peace, talked about those he had lost in the war, and talked about how to turn patriotic military service of those during the Vietnam years into something even more meaningful. The original co-chairman of the Vietnam Moratorium at Ball State then talked about the importance of peace. And finally, we were led in song by Phil Orth, who sang at all of the protests in 1969.
Could
And
you
I
wait
can
maybe
still-
just for a second until he can turn it on?
The timer, in this case, it was a timer going off, sorry.
So I should stop?
No, you can continue, continue.
So Phil Orth led us in song, and I can still hear the refrain, "Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me." The real meaning of what happened at Ball State 50 years ago, and again last month, is that one person, especially if she or he is joined by a group of like-minded friends, can make a difference. So let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with us.